Good morning.
Good morning, coffee moaners.
Good morning, everyone.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. If this is your first time to coffee moaning, it is a bit of a different one today. Usually, coffee moaning can involve
Me
all
behaving like a
kinds
Burke.
him being a Burke, all kinds of things. News from all over the place, just more personal topics. So today's coffee moaning is not a typical coffee moaning, but we felt very strongly, having watched the Sarah Everard documentary last night, that we wanted to talk about it in full, actually, because at the time and for many weeks later, we discussed Sarah Everard and all the knock-on horrors from that horrendous case for many weeks afterwards, and there was lots of interesting discussions that came up between us and with our daughters last night watching it, and we were thinking, I bet those who watched it will have had similar thoughts and feelings or different ones, so we thought it would be really good to share on it. It can be, this will possibly be a triggering conversation for some people.
One of the weird things about it is, and so we'll talk about the documentary first, and then we'll talk about what spun out of it for all of us, and especially what spun out of it for you guys. I really want this to be an opportunity for you guys to share your thoughts and feelings. I was reminded,
I was just wondering as well, for people that might join from somewhere else, maybe we should just go through actually what the Sarah Everard case is.
Well, yeah,
some people may not know.
Okay, well, for anyone who's not from the UK, Sarah Everard was a young woman who went missing in lockdown, she was missing for, I think, a week or several days, and it transpired that I'm really grossly going to truncate it because we're going to talk about it in great detail. But she was essentially abducted, raped, and murdered by a serving police officer. And this documentary really is steps through the process of her disappearance, them finding him, them charging him, arresting him, but also explores his background and how on earth he'd got to the place he'd got to, despite what seemed to be numerous numbers of red flags that kind of should have been picked up.
A number of people saying here how chilling it was seeing those interviews with him. It was incredible. First of all, what I would like to say before we go any further, I thought it was incredibly respectful to her and to her family, because we were listening to the director's interview yesterday, weren't we, on Radio 4, and she said, no, look, in no way was this programme made in collaboration with Sarah's family, but we had discussions, and what they wanted was very much for her personal, the really personal stuff, not to be dragged. And I thought it was fantastically respectful. We don't need to know the details of what he did to her and all that sort of stuff. We just,
I mean, there's no
they didn't go into that.
There's no comparison in terms of subject matter, though in a weird way there kind of is. I thought this did everything, for example, the Russell Brand Dispatches didn't do, which was it Dispatches, whatever it was, where that just sought to dramatise. This didn't. And it's really refreshing to get a documentary that was interested in just actually like treating us like we're grown-ups with an ability to kind of comprehend. It stepped us through the material, and it didn't do it. I didn't even feel the hand of building to any kind of crescendo at any point. It was measured. It was
that's
calm.
a really good way to put it.
It was poignant. It was solemn.
It wasn't salacious in any... It was solemn and it was respectful. And because of that, we were allowed to really tap into what we think about this.
We weren't being manipulated to feel
At
something.
all.
So I think that's the power of something when, I mean, there is no such thing as objective documentary, but there is the power of not getting your hands in there and trying to put your bloody statement on it. And this really didn't.
And as Rhys says there, the situation is so horrifying that it's enough.
Precisely.
Exactly. And it's a good way to describe it, Mark. We weren't being manipulated. Yeah. Somebody just said there, sorry, I missed your name. I think about her a lot. I think about what happened to her. And we're going to tell you something later that shocked us to the core, that one of our daughters said. So it's very important to continue these conversations.
And I think it's really important at the end of this as well to share in where we're actually at, because I think, you know, when this... there are so many things that kicked up for me. I just want to say the first thing, this happened in Clapham. This is a really odd detail, but it's a detail that for our household was our experience. That sort of, what do you call it, dog bend on that route.
I spent so much of my 20s there.
And that's where we used to shoot Taste on
Pointers
the right.
Road,
and it's where I take the girls to see their friend Sally all the time. And so that part of the road is so familiar.
And
it's
so busy.
familiar.
So busy.
Yeah.
So busy.
And weirdly, of all those sorts of roads in London, just to explain for anyone who isn't in London, you get lots of pokey little side roads that, in conventional terms, you go, oh, that's a bit creepy.
Not going down there.
This isn't one of those roads because it feels like an A road. You feel that everything is open, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if that's precisely why he chose it, because he was a police officer.
And what was very interesting for us watching it with our eldest was she almost spoke her thoughts out loud
Whilst watching
through it.
Yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it?
Did you notice the way she came over and sat near to me on the sofa?
She
It was
wanted
really
a hug.
interesting.
It was very, very...
But things like, because they showed the footage of her walk, and of course I was just welling up the whole time because I was just thinking of her mum watching that CCTV, footage, and I heard Maddie say, and she was doing everything right. And then she went, I mean, like what they tell us is right. And it was so interesting because she knows that that's what we're told, but she also knows we shouldn't be saying that because it's never whether we're doing something all right or not. And that's what we've taught her very much is what the person is perpetrating. But the footage was extraordinarily awakening again to the horror of it, with again no manipulation, because I had a very, very good, I thought she was a fantastic contributor, the lead detective. And you know what she said, and I don't know how many of you might have picked up on this, that she saw this case come in and she thought, oh, because it said not usual behaviour. And she said
about Sarah
her
not having been in touch,
in touch. And I thought, and she actually said, if I'm right, correct me if I'm wrong, I think she said that's very unusual.
Yes. Suggesting that not more often than not, but often there are obviously cases with certain people where maybe they've done this before. There's a log where when they go to their family and they say, is this characteristic? And they go, oh, well, yeah, she's that every
like
weekend.
She might go home, but not then phone anyone for a couple of days, so it wouldn't mean anything. But because she'd been talking to her boyfriend, they would then expect if she wasn't going to get home, she would have phoned. So that's what this detective picked up on. And it seems that it was then she very much took on the case.
Just to clarify, just a few people asking, I haven't caught it, like Christopher in Australia. It is on BBC iPlayer. Yeah. Absolutely, you can check it out.
And she was just a very good, as Mark said, very undramatic narrator. And I trusted her completely with everything she said.
And also she didn't have that other thing that you sometimes worry about with the police, which is in a way what this is about. Whereas, just because it's the police, as we've realised, it's not full of the best of characters. And I genuinely believe even in detective work, obviously you get egos. And it was even the supporting guy with the beard and the glasses, it felt like there were no egos in the two main kind of investigators, which was refreshing. The other thing...
Excellent programme making.
Excellent programme making. The other thing about it as well was there's one repeated piece of archive footage that was taken either from a dash cam or certainly taken from CCTV of the crucially catastrophic moment where she's stopped, pulled over, his hazards are flashing. What for me is really important about that, and I just want to speak to being a driver and anyone who's moving around any urban environment or not non-urban environment, if you're driving around now, there was a really important little detail where she also said about, this wasn't characteristic behaviour, but she said that one person who had commented to her husband, you don't often see women getting handcuffed. It was such a passing comment that she hadn't thought about until she saw the case, saw that this woman had gone missing. Now,
that was brilliant. It was brilliant because that changed the path of the case.
Entirely changed the path of the case.
And people might think, God, why did it take so long with CCTV? Well, you know how eventually they got the shot of him? I think after about 5 days of her missing, a PC came running into the detective and said, you've got to see this. And they picked it up on a camera on a bus. And it was a very blurred image, but you could absolutely see it was her and him.
Make it out, that's right.
And it was very, very blurred, but they think that this action was him showing the warrant card. They couldn't see the number plate, but they could make out that it was a hire car. They then looked it up,
they tracked
and
it.
then they got his
But I just think it's a really important reminder that if you or your partner or anyone you're with find yourself travelling around and you spot something that just snags a beat of interest, try and hold on to it.
Yeah,
just try and hold on to it, because that was a real moment there.
Those two things, they don't know whether they ever would have found him without those two things, that flash from the bus camera and this woman.
Yeah.
And my God, we, still today, we don't know how many victims he might have had.
The other thing this documentary did a very good job of was reminding me how we went through a journey with, because of course her disappearance was one thing. We tragically had our own experience. Maddie had a friend who went missing, and sadly that story hasn't resolved itself still. Right at the beginning of lockdown. So I remember this
day into lockdown.
Yeah, and I remember this story. I think particularly stood out. Not only because we were all in lockdown, not only because it was in Clapham on a road that one knows so well, not only because it's in your neighbourhood essentially, but also because we were like engaging with this whole idea of missing people.
We talked about it so much on here on Coffee Moaning, didn't we? Poinders Road, that there's these like maisonettes there. Friend of mine, we used to go there all the time, like through my 20s. I went to school in that area. But it wasn't. And then what transpired that it wasn't going to be just about people that were just in the area. This story, I hate to say story, but this horror just gripped us all, didn't it, as a nation? We were sick and tired of being sick and tired of the way that we felt we were living our lives and had been for a long time. And it seemed to be that it was just that a lot of people were talking about it for the first time. And because of lockdown...
Jenny Marshall says it was in real time.
Yeah, it was in real time. Yeah. And then, of course, they in the documentary, they track him down. She very, very brilliantly explained with no drama whatsoever the horror at discovering he was a police officer. We get the interview of him in his house, revolting. Maddie was shuddering when she saw him.
There. I mean, and I think what's really telling it, and again, not overly dramatically shown. No. They didn't rinse that footage as any. I hate to throw a commercial channel under the bus, but I'm going to. But commercial channels will rinse those moments for end of breaks, into breaks, end of parts, into parts. They didn't, and that for me was a really, really respectful gesture to both the audience and, most importantly, to Sarah Everard's family.
Because the family didn't want it.
You know how they tease it, and it's like, oh right, this is the bit of kind of red meat. It's terrible, isn't it? That's what they're doing.
He gave an absolutely disgraceful excuse.
Well, I want to talk about this a bit more because it was the ick ordinariness of him that I found
Maddie
most.
Was just like, oh. Because basically what he said to them was, I don't know anything about her. And then eventually he said, oh, well, I've got these people after me. They need money from me. So I had to get a girl for them. I dropped her off, but I'm sorry, I don't know where they took her. That was his story.
And the moment you saw the chap with the glasses, the detective with the glasses and the beard sat opposite, I was not getting frustrated with him because I'm sure he was probably sat there in disbelief at the answers that he was getting, though I guess do you ever get a straight admission from anyone? When he said the thing about, no, I had to take, essentially he was saying he was in debt because of gambling, he'd spent his money on stuff, and some gangs were bullying him to pick women off the street, and he'd taken her somewhere and he didn't know where. I mean, I kept of course it was the sort of detective in my own head, I kept screaming, well, okay, he doesn't know where she is, ask him where did he take her then? If he's giving you this narrative, I'm not...
But again, I think there will have been a whole lot more in that interview that for the sake of the family, they didn't. And because it was enraging to watch him, try and, get his way out of it. Anyway, and then, they go through the arrest. You see him, like, in his early interview where do you remember he tried to kill himself, didn't he, by smashing his head? And then you see him trying to pretend he's got a mental health problem. Turned my stomach.
That was the most...
It was disgusting. Absolutely disgusting.
See, I'd have thought in many ways if I was the family...
Only a minute or two.
Those moments of him would be the most... I can't even begin to imagine the horror.
To stay calm. And they will have known everything that happened to that poor woman. And they were all in contact with the family. Imagine the responsibility. We talk a lot about the dreadful police, and we're talking about one right now. But also, imagine being the decent officers, and this is happening. And you cannot lose your temper, and you cannot, because this is so important that everything is done exactly right. So
on that point, and Lee Durrant makes a point, we are going to talk about the WhatsApp groups. We're going to talk about the more endemic culture within the police force, which a number of reports have spoken to it was the Casey report, was it last year? I just want to talk about that for a minute, because what generally happens, I don't know if you remember at the time, whenever we talked at the time about women reclaiming the streets and the vigil, and we'll talk about that as well in a minute. Do you remember there was always that pushback from someone saying, but it's the same for men, and what about men? And it's always like, we can't just, well, hang on a minute, this is a moment where we can only just talk about
Yeah, we
women.
only want to talk about women in this moment.
No, not just this moment, but also on the police front. Obviously, we've always caveated this in every discussion we've had of that not all police are tarred by the same brush, and they're not, absolutely not. That's as much as I'm going to say about it because of this. There is police privilege. There is authority privilege. And so consequently, forgive us, all the good police in your force. It's incumbent on all you good police, though, to turn to your colleagues and do more about it, because actually what they've done is made us all feel, or certainly women feel, infinitely much unsafer about you as a group. So you can't, do you know what I mean? There's always that pushback. Well, we're not all bad. Well, no, we're not talking about the ones that aren't bad.
Yeah, and we are going to talk about that in a bit, but just if we keep working our way through the programme.
Yeah.
So for us, that was extremely, and I'm sure for everyone, it shook us again, just to watch these tiny moments with him. So God knows what else they saw. But we then moved into the growing rage that was, and sadness that was just right across the country, and the vigil, and it moved to the vigil, didn't it?
Well, just before that, I just want to mention this point that Reece makes. Absolutely, you're right. Due to the climate of the pandemic and it happening still in the height of lockdown and social distancing, it's conceivable how he used his twisted power to falsify an arrest abduction. I just want to mention this before we get to the vigil, because I think what hurt women so much, and men, but let's just talk about women here in this instance, what hurt women so much, and I saw the hurt on our daughter again last night, was she'd done everything right. She'd walked down.
Like that, we just go like that because we shouldn't have to do anything.
Yeah, absolutely. But in terms of the kind of survival handbook, she'd walked down the right road. She was on the phone to her boyfriend. She wouldn't break the rules.
That was the bit, wasn't it, when Maddie went, oh my God, but she was doing everything, because we say phone us and talk to us. But
the malevolence of this guy was such that it would have been even then, unusual for a solitary police officer to stop a woman and a woman to not question it. He took advantage of her observing the rules of lockdown. He took advantage of a woman who probably for an instant in that moment thought,
she'd done something wrong.
Oh, have I done something
That's
wrong?
why she would have, and when our daughter said,
horrible.
Struck us with that terrifying question yesterday, what do I do if I'm stopped by...
I think that's a really important... That for me was such a moment in the film watching.
Because it was then, wasn't it? We both, as parents...
We had to pause it.
We had to pause it, and we said, listen, this is so rare. This is so rare. This is why there's... Because you want to always make people feel safe. This is why there's a documentary. This is why there was so much outrage. This is why... And then, of course, we get to the end of the documentary and find it ain't that rare at all. But... And we was like, well, there should be two, and, run, and,
my line on it was, look, the benefit of what has happened awfully of this is it's highly unlikely a single male police officer will ever stop you. If they ever do, you say, you refuse everything they ask you to do, and you say, I need to phone my parents now, and either I will speak to them or you can speak to them. You do not do what they ask you to do. Isn't that a terrible... that's the situation we're in.
But we asked both our girls, what would you do if you were in trouble? Phone you guys.
Phone?
So you wouldn't phone the police? Oh no, I'd never phone the police.
That's what they say.
But still now, after 3 years, no, never phone the police. It's so dangerous what has happened. And as Maddie said, it's just all gone quiet, hasn't it? We were all so angry, but nothing's...
Everything peters out. Everything peters out. So sorry, the vigil.
So then we moved to the vigil, and it was a really actually very poignant moment, wasn't it? And Maddie reminded us, because we couldn't get to the vigil, could we? But what we did is we went out the front and we lit candles here. And do you remember, Maddie just became hysterical. She was, I'd forgotten that. We were like, oh God, yeah, we were so in it, weren't we? And we were crying, and it was really moving evening. Then, of course, to then just see the images of actually how it turned out, because they'd actually banned it. Yes, you went with your sister, didn't you, Zoe? They actually banned it, and they banned it because of the pandemic. But people came, and people came. Even Princess Kate came, didn't she? And people came, and people came. And then through the day, it built, and it built, and it built. And then to the evening, there were people getting up on the bandstand and making speeches. And it was, oh my God, I've got goosebumps just thinking about what we watched last night, and the goosebumps, and just women just standing, and then they're just lighting all the candles for all the women that had been killed that year. And it was very, very powerful.
Morning,
and then
Mum.
some numpty in the police somewhere decided to tell the poor foot soldiers, because I think that's what they were. They hadn't decided to do that. The police on the ground to break it up. Right, this is a pandemic and there's no social distancing going on. Oh my God. Talk about petrol on a flame. And then you see it just kicks off, doesn't it?
Well, my mum's saying Nanny Di's in the room. Hi, Mum.
Hi,
What did you
Nanny
guys think about specifically the report of the vigil and how the police handled it? It was one of the most shocking moments in the whole...
Well, it was just horrific because we'd forgotten how bad it was. They were picking women up and
hurling them around,
throwing them out of the way, literally throwing them. There could not have been a worse management. That Cressida Dick still hung on for how long?
Priti Patel backed the police.
Priti Patel, disgusting. Well, we got rid of her and we got rid of the next one. Yes, it was just shocking to be taken back to it. And another thing that really upset us this morning is that one of our daughters did say, "Oh, well, I think about her every time I go out."
Yeah.
We were like, every time you go out. She goes, well, she said, if ever I'm feeling a bit anxious about anything, I think about Sarah Everard. And you just think, oh my God. I have to admit, I do an awful lot as well.
I read the most disturbing. I mean, there's so many reports knocking around at the moment. But
where's the actions?
Well, yeah, exactly.
We're really good on getting reports.
The most recent one, which of course this documentary lent on quite heavily, is I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but a lady, Elish Angelini. So the Angelini report, who's leading this 3-stage inquiry, I think this might be the second stage. There's a final stage to look at the more endemic spread of these kind of value systems, the culture of the police force. It's weird, isn't it, how long these take? I mean, I guess they do take long because they happen to go, the root and branch thing is you have to get right in there like a gardener and start pruning at the very heart of things.
Just want to look at that.
But, this report speaks to the fact that Wayne Couzens should never have been a police officer in the first place. And this will be particularly alarming to, obviously, Sarah Everard's family, because, of course, there were signs that he'd indecently assaulted, he'd groomed, he'd sexually assaulted a child,
three days before the attack. Didn't it say that one? Said 3 days before he had been stopped for
flashing at McDonald's. He flashed twice at McDonald's. Again, thoughts go out and feelings go out to the woman at McDonald's who's probably going to be traumatised and left wondering what if for the rest of her life. But this point is really important. The inquiry said that the evidence they found included evidence that Couzens allegedly committed the very serious sexual act against a child, barely in her teens, before his policing career began. How can you have any system in which any member of the police is employed with any track record of anything?
Anything. You should have a totally clean record.
I don't get it. Is that how desperate they are for police?
What is the detail of that, though, Mark? Do they say it wasn't on, or it was missed off? I mean, had people seen that when he was given the job?
These things, well, this is the point. These things are documented. These things are on record. And so, there are now 3 separate police forces that are themselves admitting responsibility for not taking stronger action against recruiting him. Because, of course, he passed between, I think, Kent, he was then part of the diplomatic service, wasn't he?
Three different police...
Here we go. Look, the report found that 3 police forces, Kent, the CNC and the Met, failed to spot the red flags about his unsuitability for office when they could and should have stopped him. Which, of course, means that literally, if he hadn't been employed as a police officer, Sarah Everard would be alive. Couzens could enjoy the powers and privilege that accompany the role of police officer, and it discovered that he went on to use his knowledge, specifically of police powers, to falsely arrest Sarah. Investigations into investigations into allegations of indecent exposure by Couzens in 2015, 2020, and 2021 were marred by police failures. They failed to follow through on investigations. They failed to follow through on suspicion. And I've seen elsewhere, and I think it might have come out of the Casey report, is it? Let me just find this.
Somebody just
Barron's Casey report, but a police officer said on record, anonymously, to the Casey report, that essentially the culture in the Metropolitan Police Force, not the culture, isn't one of promoting it, and he went to great lengths to say this is what we all believe.
No.
Is right, but he said
That's
the
important
attitude to rape is that it is essentially, get this, legal in London, because there is no process or system strong enough to deal
What,
with it.
legal within the police?
It may as well be. No, you say it may as well be. It's
Because
something we
have
can't
so
prosecute.
For instance,
it's something
like,
we won't prosecute.
Like they have the most appalling freezers and fridges where they keep the rape
That's what the
kits.
Casey report
Freezers
found.
broke down in the summer, so all the cases were dropped because all the rape kits
All of the
were
evidence
lost.
had to be destroyed because they could no longer be used. Here we go.
Unbelievable.
An email was subsequently sent round within the Met Police saying, to this effect, it meant that all the cases of alleged rape would have to be dropped that had any evidence within the freezer. The Casey report also found a female officer was repeatedly raped by a colleague and tried to take her own life.
It came to the point that he smacked her so hard around the face she fell unconscious. She went and complained and was convinced to keep it within the family kind of thing. And the next she heard of it was a few weeks later when another officer walked past her and said, "Oh, sorry about that case being dropped."
Another police officer
This is in the report.
This was in the Casey report last year. A Met police officer who visited the home of a domestic abuse victim went on to cultivate and groom a relationship with her, discouraging her from speaking with friends and family, and didn't take the evidence required on the case that he'd sort of had brought him in contact with her. She was unaware that she was being groomed. She later found out that he hadn't even recorded the evidence.
How much more complicated is it going to get
Here we go. This
to
is the
be
quote.
a parent in the current world? When we grew up, we were told, tell the police, da-da-da-da-da. You can't...
This is the quote. This is the quote. So
literally
here's the case report. One officer talking of the detection rate of rape. He said the detection rate of rape is so low that if you look at our performance around rape and serious sexual offences, the detection rate is so low you may as well say it's legal in London. That was way down the
When
Casey
did this
report.
report come out,
That was
Mark?
a year ago.
A year ago.
Yeah,
And
March
what
23rd.
difference? What's been done?
Who knows? Well, all that we keep hearing from the new head of the police is, it's root and branch. 60 officers a month, 60 Met officers a month.
This is incredible.
This is reported in September. 60 Mets. Think about that. We're talking about the
60.
Metropolitan Police. We're not talking about police all over the country. 60 Met officers a month face the sack as bosses try to cull corrupt staff. Now, of course, one
that
of those...
won't be all sexual offences, of course.
No.
That'd be all kinds of
But
things.
one of the characters that also popped up in the documentary last night was the appalling character of David Carrick.
Do you remember him? Because that
Carrick,
was around
yeah.
the same time, and this was towards the end of the documentary where they did, having us said all the way through to our daughter, "Oh well, it's so rare, it's so rare, it's so rare," and then all this came up, and
David
we'd forgotten about him.
Well, we'd forgotten about him. As soon as they mentioned him, I turned to you guys and said, he was the guy who was done for 85.
And you said the number.
I remembered the number because I must have remembered it being so horrific. I
Horrific.
thought, 85, how? Now, something that The Guardian in its review...
85 attacks on women.
85 individual assaults or
and
rapes.
And what he would do is he would choose very vulnerable, a lot of the women, not all, because we don't know anything really, but vulnerable women that had been victims of domestic violence, maybe had addiction problems. He was...
3 a walk,
evil.
18th century Hello Neighbour says, 3 a week in court for serious offences, Met Police. Now, to be honest with you, the current kind of, what they called the head of the police, Chief Inspector, you've still got to give him time. When I hear him talk, I feel his intentions are right.
do.
I feel he wants to get that. I feel when I look at him, at least, I didn't with Cressida Dick ever, I feel his genuine look of shock, horror.
I've had quite a few interviews with him. What do we know? We hear so much and then things turn out not to be what we're hearing. But I'm the same. My gut instinct is he sounds like a guy who means business.
Yeah.
And he was very good in the way that he stood up to Sawalha Braverman.
Absolutely.
She's asking me to break the law. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah,
do you remember that?
Absolutely. So again, and so in terms of where we're at now and where things are at in terms of London, I thought the most chilling quote at the end was the prosecuting KC for Sarah Everard's family, when he said right at the end, he said, yes, of course, there's a feeling and a desire and a wish for violence and attacks against women to be lessening, but he felt that they're getting worse. I mean, he's talking more generally. I think we have a more generalised hostility towards women. I think the appetite has gone. I think the appetite... I know from my experience of shepherding my precious cargo around the city and us negotiating always, the most stressful part of anything to do with kids at the moment, young adults, is how they get to where they get to, where they're going to, when they're getting there, and travelling around. It doesn't feel any safer out there.
Zoe just says there, I'm totally exhausted, as am I. And in fact, rather shockingly, there was a clip of me on Loose Women in the documentary where I was saying, and you've heard me say this many times on MOANING, is that we are all sick and tired of the constant risk assessment. Not everybody, not all women are like this. And do you know what? I'm so glad, but many, many women are. And if you're not, and I just wish I could be like you, but I'm constantly doing a risk assessment. Okay, I'm walking on this side of the road. He looks a bit crazy. Oh, right, now do I get on this carriage? Do I get on that carriage? Oh God, it will be dark by the time I walk back, so I won't leave now. I'll ring Mark, ask him if he can get... This is just the chatter in my head, always. It's always been there. Oh, I'm not gonna go across. Yeah, I know it would take me half an hour less time. But no, just that, all the time going on in our head. It is exhausting. Zoe is right. It is exhausting. Somebody much earlier said, I won't go to the shops in the evening. My husband can't understand why I won't go. Do you know what? Do you know why? Tell him this.
Do explain.
Because he has the privilege of being a man. So he's never had to think about that. Now, he might have to have had to think about that in the case of fights or something like, but he doesn't have to think of that sexual terror, because these people terrorize. And here's the thing, our girl said, and this was the most depressing thing I've ever heard, not just them, lots of young women I spoke to. Listen to this. After all the campaigning, after the vigil and everything, and there was like Reclaim the Streets, and there was a lot of women out talking about this sort of thing, the way that we really feel. Guess what? Men were escalating. They were escalating on the tubes and the buses and the trains because we didn't realise you were that scared. Yeah. And they were intimidating them more, and they're getting off on it.
I'm pleased you've just triggered a thought
so
that I was
angry.
Scrambling for. I don't think it was necessarily within the purview of this documentary to explore this. I think The Guardian suggested perhaps it could have been, not that it was a criticism. I do think there is a question mark that needs to be asked, and this is a really important question within all the reports, all the surveys, all the investigations that are happening in the police. I think what really needs to be interrogated is a difficult question. We often talk, and it doesn't surprise us when we flag up the idea that, it's not surprising that paedophiles, for example, or child abusers, might manage to inveigle their way into careers and jobs and positions of power where they can essentially indulge in their malevolence and their illness, but also their criminality and deviance. I worry, and I've worried about this ever since. I'm not suggesting for a minute that this was a neighbour of ours. I won't either, Lisa. This has nothing to do with the neighbour that we had. I've had enough experience of knowing people in the police force through other people to not be entirely convinced that they're good eggs either. They're not necessarily people I'd want to hang out with. And my worry is, I think a big question needs to be asked, a really, really probing, searching question about, has the police force for far too long actually been the kind of place where someone who wants to be a predator on women is somewhere a policeman would go, that's a good fit.
He was a serial sexual predator over a very long space of time. Wow. I mean, his pornography tastes, everything would lead to that the police would be the best bloody job for him.
But I think the reason this could be an incredibly difficult and such a nuanced question to ask, which, as we're discovering in every topic that hits the public sort of news, no one's capable of doing any nuance, it seems, in anything, is because, of course, what you need in a police officer is someone who actually believes in the role of authority, needs to be able to actually engage in dispensing authority. And that is a hard thing to manage. It's like soldiers. It's like when soldiers spill into... You've trained them to be killers, and then you're surprised that some of them go rogue. I think that's why there's... But do you know what I'm talking about? I think the psychology of being a police officer will naturally draw someone in who wants to...
Yeah, like there are jobs that are going to attract paedophiles. Yes. And I mean, of course. But I remember around the time, actually, listening to an officer. He was one of the good ones, you could tell, really one of the good ones. And he was saying that because it's so difficult to recruit police, the standards have been dropped and dropped and dropped. And he said people can take the test and fail it, and they could just keep doing it until they pass. And those people are not good enough people or got enough brain, essentially, to be in the force. So they have got a real problem with recruitment. And so and an increase in crime. So obviously you're going to get people of a lesser caliber, aren't you?
Well, and I hate to say it, I think this is. I don't want to get sort of like big.
So many signs.
There are so many
aspects.
There are so many aspects of society which are failing, and one of them is that you're right. You're having to lower the threshold to get people in. You're having to lower the threshold because people don't see it as something that they want when you need more of it. I just want to give a real chance to some of you guys to share your thoughts. Rachel Kelleher, and it's the victim blaming of women. We shouldn't have to consider our surroundings when the most mundane of things, when doing the most mundane of things, we should feel safe.
How are we ever going to?
Oceanic Therapy London, after involved in a coercive and abusive relationship, I would never trust the police just from past experiences. Too anxious to have intimate relationships with now, to not know that you can go to, or to not feel you can go to the police at a time like that. Elsa Pop Victoria, what the hell happened to his vetting? Absolutely, this is what the Angelini report is looking at.
And we really need.
I was a cleaner for the police, and my whole family and myself had to be highly vetted. And a sergeant said to me, "You must be squeaky clean." That is wow.
Well, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't know what's going to be different from this report. Because that's what we all keep asking, isn't it? We all keep going, but how did that happen? So what we want to know is what is going to be different? What is going to be put into place so that somebody that's had multiple sexual offences isn't given a gun and part of the diplomatic... I mean, this guy had a gun.
No.
He's part of the diplomatic...
He was part of the nuclear sort of security arsenal, wasn't he? I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, where's this one? Sally Hatton, I would feel so unsafe living in London. I know these types of things happen everywhere, but location does make me feel safer.
Yes.
Reese Roberts, in the summer last year, as I was making my way home from Shaftesbury Avenue, there was a girl at the bus stop getting harassed by two blokes. I stepped in because she gave me the signal and I got them off her.
Oh, God.
Zoe, me and my sis check our locations all day long on Find My iPhone. Sounds crazy. I like knowing where she is and knowing she's safe.
But it's so anxious.
Lisa Robson, really good point. I can feel vulnerable driving alone in the dark, let alone walking.
Yeah.
You're right. There are all sorts of...
I just would never walk in the dark.
Yeah.
Never, ever, ever walk in the dark. No way. That's so unfair.
Lisa Hubbard, I won't take bins out in the dark.
I won't, Lisa. Absolutely won't. I mean, the other night I had an absolutely stinking bin and Mark was out. I was like, I just can't. I'm just not going to do it.
Rachel Vincent, I won't answer the door when it's dark and I'm on my own. Lee Durrant, I worry sick for my two nieces. They're now at the age where they'll be going out.
I play it. It's
You know,
there was a moment because obviously, you know, we're watching it with Maddie, and it was like a real honour in a way to watch it with a young woman and just hear this little stream of consciousness, little like whispers just coming out of her mouth without her even knowing. And then when the end, they read out the victim's statement of, oh my God.
I've got the victim's statement here.
From the mother.
This absolutely killed us again. I don't know if you want to read from it. For those of you who didn't...
Well, just because I thought it was really interesting what happened with Maddie at the end of this. So Sarah is gone and I'm brokenhearted.
Sorry.
She was my precious little girl, our youngest child. The feeling of loss is so great, it is visceral. And with the sorrow comes waves of panic at not being able to see her again. That bit just like, the waves of panic, can you imagine? I can never talk to her, never hold her again, never more be a part of her life. We have kept her dressing gown, it still smells of her, and I hug that instead of her. Sarah died in horrendous circumstances. I am tormented at the thought of what she endured. I play it out in my mind. I go through the terrible sequence of events. I wonder when she realised she was in mortal danger. I wonder what her murderer said to her when he strangled her. For how long was she conscious, knowing she would die? It's a torture to think of it. Sarah was handcuffed, unable to defend herself, and there was no one to rescue her. She spent her last hours on this earth with the very worst of humanity. She lost her life because Wayne Couzens wanted to satisfy his perverted desires. It's a ridiculous reason. It is nonsensical. How could he value a human life so cheaply? I cannot comprehend it. I'm incandescent with rage at the thought of it. He treated my daughter if she was nothing and disposed of her as if she was rubbish. If Sarah had died because of an illness, she would have been cared for. We could have looked after her and been with her. If she had died because of an accident, people would have tried to help. There would have been kindness. But there's no comfort to be had. There's no consoling thought in the way Sarah died. In her last hours, she was faced with brutality and terror, alone with someone intent on doing her harm. The thought of it is unbearable. I'm haunted by the horror of it. When Sarah went missing, we suffered the days of agony, not knowing where she was or what had happened to her. And it goes on. And then towards the end, because I don't want to upset people too much, it's so much. It's just unbearable. And they did edit it down. And actually, I don't think we should read all of it because I can just feel it would like really trigger people. But it was this bit towards the end where she said that, you know, she goes to bed, it's agony. She in the morning, it's total agony. And then in the morning, I wake up to the awful reality that Sarah is gone. In the evenings, at the time she was abducted, I let out a silent scream. Don't get in the car, Sarah. Don't believe him. Run. And with our daughter just sat there, she didn't even know she said it. She just went, run. Didn't she? She just said, run. Like that. And I was like, that's what she's thinking, like what we've told her. If a policeman tries to stop you and tries to, just you know, say no and then run. And it's a beautiful piece. And as I said, I felt wrong reading it all, but you know, it's there for you to read. And again, the program it took out some of that really upsetting stuff, didn't they? Again, I'm so proud of the BBC, because often I'm annoyed with the BBC, but they did her justice.
I think in this Netflix age, most documentaries are only about sensation. It's only about manipulation. It's about recreating. Just talking about documentary making for a moment. It's about recreating the narrative peaks, troughs, pinch points, drama points, expectation, narrative arcs, all that shit that goes into drama. Too many documentaries now do that and engage in that in a way that we all gobble it up and we like going on the journey, but actually it's refreshing to see something like this that wasn't the dryness of a panorama, but it was solemn.
It told
and
you
it
the
was
human
respectful.
story. And, you know, that way in part the victim statement towards the end from the mother. And why? Because we still have so many questions. We're great at reports. We spend millions on reports. But we mustn't forget, as Maddie said, we mustn't forget how we felt. We all give up. We all just like melt away, don't we? Because we don't believe that there can be any change.
Agree.
But there can be change if we keep putting the pressure on.
The most important thing about this is that I'm really worried, and you're right, is that we've had the Casey report, or the Casey inquiry in March 2023. We've now got the Angelini inquiry. Are we going to simply get another inquiry for the 4-year commemoration? We want to get away from commemorating with inquiries, and we want action. Obviously, it's not something that you can do quickly or easily. I do want to just finally say, we've shared about this experience in the past. We have first-hand experience of the inefficacy and disbelief and the belittling language of police officers.
The most shocking story we will tell you.
I know you don't remember that there was a WPC there. I vividly remember there being a WPC there and being more shocked, but on subsequent reflection, wondering, she was surrounded by 2 other police officers, and to what extent did she feel she couldn't really say what she needed to say? But put it this way, all I want to say is this. When a police officer asks me, are you sure it was a penis, sir? Go back to training school. We've called you in, we've reported you, we've made a report, and you're querying whether we know
We'll
what a
never
penis...
forgive ourselves for not reporting that. But anyway, that's for another day. But just quickly, there's a number of people here saying about their sons. And, you know, we have friends that have sons. And your fear is there. And it is totally valid and it's different. You know, our daughters have boyfriends. And I said to Mark, oh my God, now I have a double fear.
Yes,
because when they go out, I'm like, well, where are you going? What bus stop are you standing at? What? Because it's a different kind of fear, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You fear about gangs and about stabbing. Though what I would say is, when the boys walk out, and this is very difficult for you as parents, they're not worried. They don't think about it. They leave a party, they walk home, they're just not worried. Your worry is as keen as our worry, I get that. But they're not living with that ticker tape oh God, who's that man? Where do I walk till I get the bus? What if the bus man doesn't let me? All these different, this risk assessment that girls are going through. But your pain is exactly the same, I'm sure.
2 final comments. Kathy Hyde, I also worry about my 2 boys with the
Yeah.
police. They're mixed race. This shouldn't be an issue, but
God.
it is. And I just want to throw this point up, which is a really important point, Reece, and speaks to, I'm not suggesting you're going there, but maybe you are, and maybe rightly so, a sort of race thing here. Would be beneficial to have a similar BBC documentary about Sabina Nessa.
Well,
Absolutely
100%. Because Sabina Nessa, and there may well be, actually, because at that time we were just horrified. We talked about it a lot on here, didn't we?
And wasn't there an attempt, or didn't they actually manage to reduce? Was she the case where they reduced the sentence because she wasn't conscious?
Something.
She wasn't
I can't
conscious
remember. I
that she
can't
was being
remember.
killed.
But also, thinking of the way television works, the world of showbiz, because even if it's a documentary, it's still showbiz. Is that the fact that it was the police? Because it took, 5 minutes this year to read out all the names of all the women that have been murdered this year in this country. So when they're choosing stories with something new. And so why that will have been chosen in commissioning terms would have been the police.
Sarah Everard.
Sarah Everard.
Yeah, but
There's a real lack of interest in people of colour. It's a big difference, isn't it?
Yeah, but it was the Sabina Nessa case. Well, am I right in saying we reported that? Well, I don't think we reported it on here. I said it to you.
We talked.
No. When I said it to you, you were horrified. No, but the fact that the sentencing of the person was reduced, or the reduction was sought, because she wasn't conscious of the final.
That's right.
Horrific strikes to her.
That's right. That is
how many reasons? Do you know? I know what you're saying.
It was something like that.
Yeah,
Obviously, we haven't double checked that, but it was something around that was so outrageous.
So horrendous. Okay, guys. Well, look. As we say,
sorry. What's the name of the MP that reads out the names?
Jess Phillips.
Jess Phillips. And this year, before she read it out, she said, "I am so sick and tired of doing this because nothing changes." And I think that's what we must all remember.
What can we do? In a sense, we need to march. We need to march.
We need to do something.
We need a march. We need a huge... Mum, you need to get your marching boots on, and we need to... There needs to be a march.
We need to know what we were asking for, though. What do we want? That's the thing. What do we want? What do we believe can be
Safety on the
changed?
streets. It's not for
but
women.
It's
not for women to work out how that is to be secured.
I like that in France there is zero tolerance. And it is. There are many things here that are hardly even sniffed at that would be done under the laws of terrorism, isn't it? Under the Terrorism Act in France.
Yeah, well,
it's incredible.
Let's get marching, and also let's get marching, and then of course every woman in the land will also be called a hate marcher. That will be another moment. It's just ridiculous. What kind of times do we live in, guys? If you need to watch it or want to watch it, it's on BBC iPlayer.
And just one last thing, some of you may have seen it on my Instagram. Our dear friend Hannah, who has stage 4 breast cancer, had the most devastating news yesterday. She's going to be on Loose Women with me on Friday, that the NHS England have disallowed women in England and Wales to have this astonishing drug, game-changing drug, that's what it's been called, for secondary breast cancer. Breast Cancer Now have launched an urgent petition because we're talking about women who don't have a lot of time. So there is not a lot of time to shift the dial on this. And they've said to me directly, Breast Cancer Now, if we can get the kind of numbers to sign the petition that watched the reel that I made a couple of months ago, it can't be ignored. So please, right now, go under here and click on the petition. Who wouldn't want this drug to be made accessible?
So that will be underneath this live. Once this is processed, uploaded, and it's on the channel, you will see the link, and I will also pop the link on the community page. Share it. You're absolutely right. Get enough petitions. Get this spoken about in the House of Commons.
In the House of Commons. Yeah. It's also on my stories. You can also go to Breast Cancer Now. Please do it.
And finally, Nanny Di, good old feminist in the room there. She said they were called the Reclaim the Night marches. That is... Let's reclaim the night. Mum, you should spearhead it.
Night. When was this? In the 70s?
This was in the 70s. I remember, reclaim the night. I remember the placards.
We need to do an interview with you about
Reclaim the night, Mum. Let's talk about it. Anyway, guys, have a good day, and we'll see you later with some content.